everyone? Yeah, we got a really good program for you. I want to thank again Enoch. I want to thank First Person. I want to thank the African American Museum for having us here in this wonderful program. Okay, we're going to get started. I'm not going to talk anymore. Our first performer is an outstanding spoken word artist. She is a well-known actress. She's a stage manager. She's just an arts person all around, and I know quite a few of you probably wouldn't know who she is. Put your hands together for Miss Stephanie Renee.
Speeding bullet for my brother Don. You gleamed like a speeding bullet when you smiled down at me, and only the breadth of your shoulders was wide enough to outspread that grin. I was little girl to you, a full foot shorter than you. Your shoe size and years my senior both equal 15. You were everything one could imagine a big brother. You were fast and precise like a speeding bullet as you sliced and diced in your puffy white hat and apron. You were a title instead of action, chef instead of cook. Your position had honor. Those with taste buds tantalized would beckon you from the kitchen to praise your blend of spices and try to make you spill your secrets, while still you smiled that mile-wide smile and asked them to be sure and come back again sometime. You had an inner spark like that of a speeding bullet. You painted your room red, black, and green and actually understood Funkadelic lyrics. You took me to those movies Mommy and Daddy wouldn't have approved of in your black and white Starsky and Hutch car with your afro and your Newports. Man, you were so cool. But you were dangerous. Like a speeding bullet fired at improper targets, you filled your big black frame with white lies. Up your nose and through your veins rode packs of white lies, and you were seduced by those whorish whispers. Believed you slept more peacefully due to its nightmarish lullabies. You believed in its love more than mine. You rushed to Philly to visit me just like a speeding bullet, wanted to see your baby sister as a freshman in college, wanted to see some of that purity. You had surrendered, but you couldn't stand your reflection in my eyes. You saw your problem through my eyes and were ashamed. You never called me after that day, and I missed you, baby. Where was that smile? You were fierce and angry like a speeding bullet after Daddy refused to give you more money. He no longer cared to support your nasty habit because he cared. We all lectured in spite of your obstinate deafness and prayed that at least you saw the signs. We were almost relieved when you stopped coming to visit. We all loved you too much to watch death in slow motion. But death comes fast for speeding bullets when the impact is point blank. Hurts more when deaths are accidental. There were no excuses that could heal your pain from head-on collisions with drunk drivers exceeding even your speed limits. Where were you going that late at night, that night late in December with our presence in the backseat? Seems like poetic justice that you were killed by a man who was running from the law when you were so desperately running away from yourself. Didn't you know that eventually you would become the target? Didn't you know that speeding bullets explode?
Thank you. We now welcome the director, executive director of First Person Arts Festival, Jamie J. Brunson, to offer a welcome and introduce our other presenters today.
My name is Eddie, and thank you for having me. My connection to refugee families began the day I was born in a Thai refugee camp.
The aftermath of the secret war in Laos displaced hundreds of thousands of Lao people like my parents. I have no memories of that period because I was so very young when we were able to leave for the United States. The stories of what life was truly like for my mother and father are locked away in the back of their minds, perhaps stored away to protect them from the hurt of knowing what it felt like to flee the most heavily bombed country in history. From 1964 to 1973, the U.S. bombed more than 2 million tons of ordnance on Laos during 580,000 bombing missions, equal to a plane load of bombs every 8 minutes, 24 hours a day, for 9 years. The bombings were part of the U.S. secret war in Laos to support the Royal Lao government against the Pathet Lao and to interdict the traffic along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I take it upon myself to find a way to heal the heavy burden carried by my parents. Their story is my story, and I need to share with each and every one of my children. The challenge for me now is how and when to share this story. I still have so much to learn even as I stand here as a seasoned mother of 6 children. I'm truly blessed and honored to have my beautiful and loving mother staying with me, and she's here tonight. Hi, Matt. She has lived across the country for almost 5 years. Her return home to us means she's able to personally share her stories, love, and wisdom so that we can preserve our family heritage. My father is a strong-spirited, rugged, handsome man that is so proud of his family. Although my parents have parted ways for several years now, they both can agree that they love their children and grandchildren very much. So they will forgive me when I admit I'm embarrassed that I cannot speak my first language of Lao as fluently as I wished. I spoke only Lao as a very young child. I started kindergarten and it was like the fluency slowly melted away. I learned to speak English, which was only meant to be a second language. Now it is the unintentional primary language spoken in my home. I regret letting my language escape me, especially the day I had to tell my father about my son's diagnosis. It was so hard for me to find the right words in Lao to explain something that was so complex to me. My father is a wise man, but was never a man of many words, so I was not surprised at all by his reaction. He simply looked at me and gave me a nod of acceptance. He already knew my son was different from his other grandchildren. Now there were words for what made him different, not less. Children diagnosed with autism are often challenged by language, play, social, and behavioral issues. My son has 5 sisters, and 4 girls came before him. All of them reached their developmental milestones in a timely manner. That did not happen for my sweet baby boy. I noticed quickly he wasn't responding to his name, had very little speech, and wasn't interested in playing with others. He had explosive tantrums and meltdowns. Raising children is rewarding and can be a challenging part of life, especially when you get a diagnosis of autism. My son is 4 years old now. He was diagnosed when he was shy of 3 years old. My partner is my son's father. He is a very headstrong and proud Cambodian American man. He was raised by parents that survived the Cambodian genocide that murdered almost 2 million people. His childhood was tainted by the struggles of Cambodian refugees that had to adjust to a new life after an unspeakable crime. He was brought up to be loud, proud, and have a tough exterior to protect himself because he knew the world could be cold, hard, and unforgiving for men like him. I believed he wanted to teach our son how to protect himself in that same sense, but now there was a new lesson to learn. We had to learn, and we had to continue to learn about autism. Early intervention was going to help give him his best chance when the odds were stacked against him. His father and I must work together with our family to give my son the life he deserves. We are constantly learning and growing. I want my son to be comfortable in his own skin, and it's important for me to share the message of awareness, acceptance, and inclusion. I just want my son to be happy, healthy, and live a meaningful life, no matter what the diagnosis is. I will never claim to be the expert when it comes to autism, but I am, without a doubt, the absolute expert when it comes to loving my son. I will always champion for him and be his advocate, because he is my heart. He is the hero that challenged me and his father to be better people. Thank you.
After that. Hi everyone. Hi. How is everyone doing this evening? I want to thank everyone for having me. So originally when I was approached with this opportunity, I was not aware that I had to really dig deep. So I got my undergrad in philosophy, and after our rehearsal the other night, I heard some of the wonderful stories by these ladies, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna go deep. So I originally wrote a poem to present to you guys, which I will probably read at the end. But when I had to come up with a story, when I had to tell a story, there were certain moments that I reflected on in my life that actually inspired the story. So I begin the poem with talking about, to be completely honest, I wasn't trained to love Black men. My father is a Black man, and he was the first person to let me down, so my entire life has been consumed with either I have to be the best at this, I have to be the best at that. Dealing with rejection and dealing with disappointment was very, very difficult and was very hard. And then going to a school where, the Black boys would tease me because of the way I pronounced my vowels. And then going through an experience where I was physically assaulted by a group of Black boys that made me just have a very negative perception about Black men. And as a Black woman, it wasn't until later on in my life that I met Black men who would stand up and defend me and who would heal a lot of the damage that was done primarily by my father, because that was the first Black man that was actually in my life. So I'm going to read a little bit of the poem and get through it. To be completely honest, I wasn't trained to love Black men. My father is a Black man and was the first to let me down. My first disappointments were with my dad. He rarely let me clarify. He never came around. He was the first Black man that let me drown. The Black boys in school used to tease me because of the way I pronounced my vowels. Those would be the same Black boys that punched me so hard that I hit the ground. Black eyes, ew. 2 words that were an awful sound. My experience with Black men did not begin very sound, but I would eventually learn that there are Black men that will treat me like I am wearing a crown. I learned this later on in life, that there are Black men that will not tear me down. For the first time in my life right now, I'm surrounded with Black men that have turned my negative perception of them completely around. My black men wear suits when we are out on the town. My black men cheer me up when I am down. My black men understand, as a woman, my emotions, they go up and they go down. But that doesn't stop them from encouraging me, elevating me, and letting me know that I am worthy. My black men protect me, they invest in me, they fight for me. They understood how broken I was and they healed me. My black men are the ones not shown on TV, the ones that attended private schools only, the ones that are busy on the go but never too busy to show me their love. The ones who read my black men are the ones, my black men are the ones with their my black men aren't the ones with their pants sagging in the back. Not that there's anything wrong with that. They're the ones who read Black Power politics books. They defend me in court. They took me home to meet their mama. Hi, Mrs. Parsons, and his mama said, and you must be Mrs. Cooks. My black men defend me in my absence and adore me in my presence. They put me in the headlines so I can impact and inspire the masses. They helped me make history. Being the first ever was fantastic. My black men could be the ones to be arrested at a Starbucks or shot holding an iPhone mistaken for a gun. I cherish my black men because they taught me how to love. Thank you to my black men. You are appreciated. You are loved.
Y'all feel all right? My role here today really was moderator, but I was challenged by our director and our executive director to actually share and be a part of the program as well. And Jamie in particular said to me, oh, do a second piece that's about being in a relationship. And I was like, Lord, first of all, I have not been an active poet in years. As I went back and kind of thought about my catalog, most of my poetry is written in the midst of the relationship, where everything's all beautiful and wonderful, or it's about me afterwards. Just me, not us, me. And so I really had to go look and see if I had ever written anything that was about how do we negotiate within the context of relationship. And so, this is a little older, but it's the closest thing to that, about the complexity of being in a relationship with our brothers. Now, I want to acknowledge also, you see our loyal to the throne? So that tells you where I live. But in moments, sometimes we have to have a reckoning. And that's what this piece is about. It's called Sweet Release. There is not, nor ever was, force to our fit. No more than the slightest coercion to our conjoining. Since the inception, we've slipped into and slid over one another, slow, smooth, and easy, like syrup on short stack, forming juicy coagulations, swarming sticky sweet, till you sop me clean again. And again, returning to identical place. We, sure-footed like somnambulance gait, chasing subdural beacons home to an internal torch, glowing red hot, projecting warmth like hearth, like heart, like home. Such sweet illusion, this. Stolen moments of closeness, respite from the vagaries of daily living, our passionate oasis finally wavering. Sands of time render our biblical knowing insufficient. Yielding to inevitability, this comfort can no longer be preserved by willful stasis. I loose the knot. Take down the dream catcher suspended above our commingling sight, laden with coital outbursts, whispered wishes, and selfishly uttered could-have-beens. Need to free myself from their influence, transcend their sweet seduction, brace the inner push to please you for the pull of the earnest hunger in your touch, force-feed my desire with more fulfilling stuff. Yet, even now I shudder. Thoughts of the delight offered by your mouth and hands on and on and on cause quakes in my resolve. Morality repeatedly lashed by your velvet whip like mosquito, you sting soft. Must fight the feelings, attend to my real needs. Wedge these fingers open from their clenched fists, refusing to let go of the sporadic peace found in your presence, your essence, this bed. Will find such comfort in my alone now. Take fearful but firm footsteps in sacred solitude, sated no more by the occasional taste of you, preferring to fill up on abundant true love that begins within me.
This next performer coming up right before we have our last storyteller come on, has performed all across Philadelphia, from Warm Daddies and everywhere. She's a wonderful, outstanding singer. She's gonna sing a song that Jamie requested. Oh, Lord Jesus. I'm not gonna tell you what it is. Put your hands together for Miss Janae Latrice.
Love Mama Z. Thank y'all so much for having me. Let's get right into it. Let's tell a story, why don't we? It ain't no way. I know it. Yeah. For me to love you. If you won't let me. It was played. But how can I do all the things I can if you're tying both of my hands? Ain't no way. Just ain't no way. Ain't no way for me to love you if you won't let me. Can I talk to you guys? Stop trying to be someone Don't you know I need you? It ain't no way, it just ain't no way. It ain't no way. It ain't no way, Lord, for me to love you, yeah. You won't let me. If you won't let me.
Hands together for Miss Janae Latrice. And for future bookings, you can just call me. Well, that leads into our wonderful introduction of our last storyteller. Put your hands together for, I call her Lady Asia. Come on.
Navigating a lifetime of encounters with Black men always leaves you at the undeniable and unsurprising fact that all of them have the trauma in common. We know it well because we share a part of it. It morphs a bit throughout generations, but it's still the obnoxious son bitch it always was. If I let him be broken without my protection, I release him to the wolves, where they will never rehabilitate, never enlighten, never nurture. They will only destroy him on my watch when I knew what they would do. So I love him not just because I long for him, not just because he is home, but out of duty, out of survival. Loving a Black man is a bittersweet torture of the peace of mind. How do you bind and mend and grow simultaneously? How do you not? You jump in and figure it out. So there is my dad, whose life went like this. Birth father dies when he is young, raised during the thick of segregation and Jim Crow, gets drafted, discovers drugs, comes home alive, robs a bank, goes to jail, gets his sentence reduced and then expunged without a lawyer, goes to school, sort of, manages to father 3 children with different mothers before I am born. I didn't understand how to factor these things into how to love him. I loved him and wanted to believe that all that was beautiful about him wasn't tainted. It was my mother who, in doing her due diligence as a Black woman, gave space for me to place him on a pedestal, albeit a shaky one. I was allowed to adore him. My mother suffered in the shadows of his addiction, infidelity, and subsequent lack of financial support so that I could say, my daddy, in that way that only a child who is sure she is loved would say. She gifted me that so I could only see the dad who sang me jazz standards, the dad who took me sledding, the dad that made me laugh and knew everything. Despite her resilience, the resilience I am still in awe of, my mother could not keep his secrets forever. I found out about the cheating first. Once I could see the cracks in the foundation, I believe it was my personal indoctrination into the complex world of loving men of color.
Take it on.
As my idyllic version of my father was falling apart, I became hard, bitter. Loving him was harder because I judged him harsher. It wasn't until I met my husband that I saw hope, that the stench of fathered by a typical black male disappointment could be scrubbed from my chances at repeating the cycle. He was honest, family-oriented, religious, independent, principled. I wanted to leave my dad in a memory, a past I was overcoming. It was hard because that really was my buddy, my dad. He still had that daddy effect on me, but now I was watching my husband become a father, and I was less impressed with him. When I found out about the drugs, now that broke me. I had to protect my children, so I cut him off. I knew better, but eventually my husband occupied the empty pedestal where my dad used to be. My husband's story is this. Well, in 7 bullet points. Birth father in prison at his birth, where he stayed until after all of our children were born. His mother marries a great man who is also sent to prison when my husband was about 11 years old. But he still raised him. Raised in a close-knit Black Islamic community, finds his passion as a teenager, lands a life-changing opportunity to make music, fathers his firstborn with his wife, me. Destroys the cycle for both of us. I was, of course, in awe of all he had endured and how he was able to, despite these things, have room for me, for us. I had language now to describe our unique struggle in this world. It heightened my empathy. It also made me more willing to love myself less, to make room for his healing, his self-discovery. And everywhere I looked, I was fed the idea that this was at the core of being a good woman, a good, strong, Black woman. This is what made us better suited to love them, right, than anyone else. This ability to know his pain and swallow it. The ability to speak his language, but be silent. It's equal parts a sham and the gospel. I believe it is this misunderstanding that sits at the center of what disconnects Black men and women, what keeps the men emotionally stagnant and emotionally depletes us. I have been caught cringing inside when someone calls me a good woman. Does it mean that I am elevated from my ability to haul everyone's bag of feelings like a mule without breaking? Have I hidden my racial trauma cleverly in my womanness so it takes its societal seat where women are placed out of his way? I have learned that loving my husband is most satisfying when I am clear about who I am. When I am honest about what I want and where I want to go. It is the best kind of love by example. I don't help him at all by secretly adjusting what I present and convincing myself that this is a form of protecting him, giving him patience and room. The more I am actually these things for myself, I create a space for him to be also my real due diligence. Enter stage right, my firstborn son. He never even knew he was lucky. Then Trayvon was murdered and I saw my son's innocence packaged shit and called Tyrone. We loved and raised my son exactly the way I planned. If I could have kept him in our bubble, all would be good. But he had to go out into a world of broken men and boys. The hardest thing to love my son through is his toxic interactions with Black males who didn't have what he has. He was often left to dump down his emotional intelligence just to have other young men to be social with. Sometimes he had to do this for adults. Sometimes he did this for his grandfather. And sometimes he did it for his dad. I never figured raising a decent person would bring him so much strife. I tried to do my Black mama best and insist on him attending a predominantly Black school, but that came with blessings and backlash. Not one, but 4 phone calls his freshman year of college to say, "Mommy, my friend was shot last night." When my father was diagnosed with cancer, I began seeing him more often after being estranged for the longest and last time. I went to visit him and he purred so much to me on that particular day. He said what he admired most about my husband was how he was able to hustle his life with his wife and kids in tow. He admitted he never saw it that way. He admitted his twisted values informed his approach to life and family. He said he was most grateful to God that I had found a man worthy of me. He died 4 months later. It's no surprise that I have regret, but the last year of my father's life was a blessing of reconciliation and closure. His gift to us both. One thing I will never forget, one thing I will never get back is the moments my son missed with him. With all the children, really. I should have allowed my children to sit at his feet, to know where they came from. My father was a convict, a drug addict, and a cheater. But he was also an athlete, a scholar, a charmer, and the most fun. He was a king, black as night and handsome as everything, and surprisingly perfect penmanship. The country pressed him and he faltered, but they failed because I loved him anyway. Last year we drove my son to college. There was an elaborate ceremony and a new student orientation. My husband and I beamed like supernovas. Two barely high school grads who raised their kid on music business money were dropping their black boy to one of the blackest black colleges in the country. We beat the cycle's whole ass. And we were leaving. But as we were leaving, my husband got a call saying his birth father had passed away. A man he had never laid eyes on. The same day we released our own son to manhood. By this time in my life, I knew I could never heal his pain. That was a journey between him and God. I knew his life as a black man was a little like that day. A celebration of excellence, overcoming, hope, faith, and love, interwoven with the pain of broken bonds, systemic violence, racism, and arrested development. A week ago, I spoke with my son after the news of the final friend's murder. He longed to come home. He seemed exhausted. I wondered, could I be learning the unspoken lesson we never admit to? You know the one. No matter how hard we try, the world will get them, break them. The tears began to well up as he described how close this had hit to home. I said, son, you should go see a counselor. He said, I already made an appointment.
Here's the really important part. We want to have a talk back with you and talk, you can ask questions, but also talk about, feel free to talk about any challenges that you may have as you are trying to love and support males of color in your life. And I see in the back all that, Shabbat, Katin Dancer, Ginger Bell, so DBH Ideas has brought to you her people here and resources that can help you if you are struggling and need some assistance. So please know that we are here with resources. There are tables. As you leave, when you turn in your survey, you'll get a badge that will also have information. So please know this is not the end. This is not a one and done. This is the beginning of an important conversation, and DBH Ideas is here for you.
Yeah, real quick also, I want to thank my colleague, Amy Clinton, who you see kind of running around. If anybody does need, or, she's, a clinician on deck, so if anybody needs anything, she's here. But also as well upstairs, what you'll find is our table for Healthy Minds Philly. So that opportunity to get a free mental health screening right there on site with us, right upstairs.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you, everyone, for coming out, and especially for our storytellers and our director, for helping to bring us into an emotional place where we can continue the sharing that this talkback is all about. And so I want to just begin to ask all of our wonderful panelists here on the stage that you all have addressed, for the most part, in your sharing, some of the formative concepts that you have been given and have been dealing with as adult women in loving the men in your lives. But if there's a way for you to sort of boil down what the seed is that's planted, because I think a lot of us in our relationships sometimes struggle with whatever the emotional challenge is of us being able to form solid bonds, whether we're talking about friendships, romance, or business partnerships. A lot of that is the seed of where our challenges are both in the behavior that we're encountering, but it's what we learned early about what we should have, what kind of expectations we should have in relationship with the men in our lives. So if each of you could just sort of talk about what you've learned in growing into adulthood about what was in that seed that you have been dealing with, that's been challenging you and also informing you.
I spoke a little bit about it in the story. One of the things that's been a powerful lesson for me is about being, speaking in truth and being honest about what I'm feeling. I think a lot of times that we are not honest with people, but particularly our partners, about how we actually feel. We're kind of acting out some sort of other thing instead of just saying what it is we're feeling or how or where that feeling comes from. And then behaving in that space trains them to do the same thing. So they don't even tell you, you might say something, but then they tell you something back based on what they feel you need to hear or what is appropriate response for that moment. One of the things that I'm still learning and that I find has been like mind-blowing for me is that the more that I am in touch with verbalizing exactly what I'm feeling and where I think it's coming from, exactly what I'm feeling and where I feel like it's coming from, it almost like lays a road. And I've become less concerned with, and I'm sorry, I'll try to make this short, but okay, so I'll give you an example. An example is, there would be times where I would not say something about a problem or issue that we were having, and then I would go through this whole drama in my mind about it, be upset, be angry, and maybe I don't say anything 3 times, but by the time I say something, I'm so angry that my husband thinks I'm like I'm a beast, and he just doesn't know that I was angry 3 other times before. I've not said anything. So I think sometimes the idea that we can get to know ourselves very well and be able to verbalize very well who we are with no malice against the other person, to not feel like we have to fix anybody else, that when you walk into a conversation that you need to be ready and prepared with your full truth
And that full truth should not be formulated based on how you think that person's going to feel about it. It should be based in exactly what you are actually feeling. And that's not said in a way that you know will break them. That's not said in a way that's mean or nasty.
Right.
That's said in a way that's confident, that's calm, that's peaceful, that's about that peace of mind. That leaves that person no choice but to then give that back to you. And when they don't, or they fight you on it, then you see that's an indication of another issue. That's not yours.
Right.
And then you're in a much better position to say, hi, maybe you need to handle that. Or I can relate to that, which is even better than you need to handle it. It's like, I can relate, I've been there, or whatever the case may be. So that's been mind-blowing for me. It keeps a lot of the arguments down to a minimum. Yes.
So, first of all, for this being the first time telling the story, it was beautiful. And you said something particularly inspiring to me about, it's easy not to love, but that's the cycle. So I have a question. I've experienced anger in relationships with males of color. Because if you have a brain in your head and you turn on the news, you can see why a male of color might be angry in this world, But what happens when you're trying to love them and there's anger? Maybe they're hitting you, or maybe they're being abusive to you in the home because they're angry because of what they're dealing with. How do you deal with that? Because you don't want to kill them, you don't want to stay in that kind of relationship as it is. Except where you're DHIDS, I thought I was just throwing out there. How is this woman to handle? Is this relevant to anybody who has anger in the relationship? How do you handle that?
Well, I'm going to pass the mic, but I will say this little tiny easy bit is, number one, anything that's violent, you have to remove yourself. Because you have to preserve the self. And preserving the self never goes away, whether it's violent or not. And anger can present itself in a lot of different ways. And sometimes anger can present itself in like a when you try to mess yourself up, what is that? Self-sabotage, thank you. It can present itself in self-sabotage, which sabotages the whole situation.
Right.
So, my thing is, it always really goes back to the self. There's something about you that a discussion you haven't had. If you are in a relationship with someone whose anger is acceptable to you, that is normal to you, that is home for you.
Yeah. Pamela's our clinician who can give some professional expertise on this.
So we just really want to let everyone in the audience be aware that the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services has a website, healthymindsphilly.org. So the information for Healthy Minds Philly is available on our resource table. If everyone could please visit the table and get our literature on that website. There's a site on there where you can take a mental health screening. It's not going to diagnose you, but it is going to allow you to know if you may want to speak with someone based on the outcome of your evaluation. Okay.
Thank you for that. I definitely agree. I think number one, to answer both questions, I think for me, not having my father around and not being grounded and having that emotional support of a man, and then having a stepfather that practically, pretty much resented me and made my life very challenging and very difficult. So early on, it was very, I had to understand as an adult that I need to learn what my triggers are and I need to learn where my boundaries are. And I have been in relationships with men of color who were angry, but it was more about me and me not feeling worthy and me not wanting to experience those same disappointments and rejections that I felt with my father, or my dad always saying, I'm going to come and see you, I'm going to come and see you, and I'm waiting and he never shows up. So as a child, I built up this, threshold for disappointment, and subconsciously that made me feel unworthy. So as an adult, having been in a domestic violence relationship, having this rage and this anger, having this mindset that like I need everyone to like me because I'm filling this void that my dad left. All of that, like going on my own self journey and discovering that, you know what, I have a lot of issues that are related to not having my father around. And those issues are around being supported emotionally. And why am I constantly getting into these relationships with men who are emotionally unavailable? But it was more about me than it was about them. And me learning to actually like love, like shutting all of that out and learning to love myself. And then all of a sudden, when I started to do that and I wasn't constantly seeking, I let it find me once I stopped, got myself grounded, and then there were men of color who started to come into my life, who started to, and it was very challenging for me to accept the fact that people, you know, here are black men who want to treat me good, here are men of color who want to treat me good, you know, and that self-sabotaging thing comes in like, why does he want to do that for me? I'm not worthy enough for doing that because this is how my dad used to treat me, or this is how so-and-so used to treat me. So it was a lot of deprogramming myself. And in that deprogramming, I learned more about, you know, who I am. So then I was able to like make better decisions. Now there have been men that I've loved and I've had to love them from afar because it's what was best for me and it was best for them. And sometimes they didn't realize that they had that rage. And they might not have been taking it out on me physically, but they may have been not communicating with me or giving me the silent treatment, like you said. It manifests itself in various different ways. Or he wasn't out doing anything, but he was always coming in later than he should have been coming in, so it's emotional manipulation. And once I realized that because I was emotionally broken, because of the black men in my life, I realized that I was vulnerable. Okay, and there were men out there that would prey on that vulnerability and exploit that vulnerability. And it was about me finding self-worth in something that I was doing. So when I started to seek higher education, when I started like, what do I want to do with myself? What kind of woman do I want to be? How do I see myself in 5 years? And when I started doing things for myself, setting my own goals, achieving those goals, that really that's, you know, when I was in college, that's when I met my boyfriend. I've been with him since 2011, it's 2018. So like, you know, I never thought that I would, like, my circle is like all educated black men, like that love and support me, and I never thought that I would actually have that in my life. So I think the key really starts out with the individual. I think it starts with us as women. And once we have ourselves together, then we can emotionally, and no man is going to want to take from you. He's only going to want to add to you. And you can't see that. I couldn't see that. I'll use I statements. I couldn't see that through all my emotional issues. So yeah, long answer to your short question.
I think for me, for my story, I think it's really challenging for us as parents. It can be challenging when you're speaking about autism, and it can be overwhelming. So I think it's important practice in terms of like mental health, mental wellness, and checking in, and you know, caring for yourself just so that you can care for the others. You know, that's first and foremost. If you're not able to care for yourself, how will you care for those others? So that is very important. So I'm all for, you know, I think it's good practice to like seek the help if you need it. If you feel overwhelmed, don't be afraid. You know, and I always encourage that of my partner, because I know what it feels like, and it is overwhelming for us, but you know, we work through it, and it's for ultimately, you know, it's ultimately for our son. So we do what we have to do.
Okay, I'm going to be really quick to answer. It's a two-part question. To answer the anger part, for me, I come from a very Afrocentric family, my mother and father. My mother was a Malcolm X follower and my father was a Martin Luther King, so you can imagine what my household was like with those debates and those battles. However, they were very Afrocentric, and we used to have a conversation about, when I was younger, about us being kings and queens when we were in Africa, and the time they came over to take us and brought us over here as slaves. So the anger didn't just start for our men of color and women. The anger started a long time ago when they enslaved us and brought us over here and separated the families and molested the children and raped the women and castrated the men and separated us from each other and put us against each other. I tell you, that Willie Lynch, he did a job on us. Yes, he did. So the anger started then. So, and it was just a vicious cycle over and over and over again. So, and we as people of color, we're forced to take the steps of how to deprogram, to reprogram, to love ourselves first, as they said, and then we are able to love our men. And then we can have an open communication of understanding and love. The second answer to that, I grew up in a household of very loving, caring parents. So if they did argue, I never saw it. I'm old school, I'm 61. My parents were married for 64 years. So I come from a generation of you gonna stick this out, no matter what comes. We're going to stay together. There was no such thing. They weren't divorcing each other, anything like that. So I came up in a family with a very loving father. So I saw my father every day treat my mother like a queen. He never called her Clara. He always called her dear honey. So I didn't hear, on first terms, Clara and Clarence. I heard that. I saw him open up the doors. I saw him open up the car doors, open up the doors to wear her, put on her coat, pull her chair out. This is the love I saw from a man of color. That's what I saw. So as I grew up, that's what I expected. But it didn't happen. There were times that I didn't have that type of man. And when I didn't have that type of man, it brought up anger in me. It brought up arguments and saying to myself, why can't I have the man like who my father was? Well, Z, that ain't happening now. There were moments that I did have relationships that were like that. My husband was that way. And it's just the fact of understanding, having an open line of communication, and saying, like they said, I can't fix you if you don't want to fix yourself. I have to fix me and you have to fix you, and we have to work this out together. Let's be Mr. and Mrs. Fixer on each other first and then together on ourselves. So I'm just used to that type of man. So I require for myself, when I meet someone, that you have to have certain requirements. I think we have to each, male of color and women, we have to set standards. You don't have to have no $1 million in the bank. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about the way you treat me. I'm worried about your character. That's what I'm worried about. So I think for me, once we find those things in ourselves, that will help resolve some of those anger issues and the psychosis that we're going through. And once we start cleaning ourselves up and then working on each other, I think we'll be able to make things work. Because I love me some men of color, honey. That's all I got to say.
Toss out one more question and then we'll open the floor for all of your questions. And that comes back to something you just said, Z, the idea of communication, right? Because in our society, if we're not even delving deep into the people of color waters, we have set gender expectations that do not necessarily encourage us to talk through anything. We're either supposed to be, psychic and understand the full spectrum of what everybody's going through and somehow deal with that. Or we sort of set ourselves up for the challenge because women are supposed to be the emotional, emotive ones, and men are supposed to be more stoic and what have you. And if we're fitting into those expectations, the communications challenge becomes huge. So what would each of you offer us from your personal experience about being able to create a situation where communication is encouraged? so that we can work on ourselves individually and collectively for this relationship that we're in, whatever that relationship might be.
Well, for me, it's just think about 4 things. First thing first, spirituality. No matter what you believe in, you have to, I think spirituality should be in place. Patience. We need a lot of patience with each other. Understanding of who we are and who that they are. Not putting expectations upon each other, accepting us where we are to build each other up. And last thing for me is a lot of love.
For me, I definitely have a supportive family, and so blessed, especially my mother. She has been such a wonderful help since she's been back home and just really supporting our family. And I'm so proud of her because she has learned about, she has taken upon herself to learn about autism. Her main language that she speaks is Lao. So, like, as I told in my story, it was a challenge, like trying to explain that to my dad, but thank goodness for YouTube. So she was able to watch it in her language, and now she's, she has a better understanding, and she can really be supportive and help us. Thanks, Mom.
I think I would have to say I'm a Generation Xer, but I take up some things from the millennials. So, and it sounds weird. Well, this is both old school and new school. It sounds weird, but I always remember loving kindness and that I don't want to hurt him. So when I have communication issues, I know that I can shut down. So I will either text what I have to say, I will either write it in a letter, or I'll write it in an email, because I have been in situations where I've spoken out of anger before to someone that I love, and I've said things that I didn't want to say, and that gives me a moment to like decompress myself. So for me, I look at it as a barrier, as a wall, and I try to contain my rage or my disappointment and my anger, and realize that, he's really not the source of it. So when it comes to communication, I start to get creative in the ways that I want to communicate. If I want to say that I'm sorry, I'll play his favorite song or something. But there are ways I would suggest that I kind of sort of set a mood. And when I set that mood, it makes it easier, because now our defenses are both down if we've had an argument. And because I've set a mood and the things that he likes, that makes it easier for him to communicate with me and for me to communicate with him. So, setting a mood helps, and also, using either writing down a letter and, sending a letter, or writing a text message, because as I get it out, I'm like, I don't really want to send that like that. I kind of want to think about that a little bit more. And always remembering, that he loves me, and I want to respond in kindness and not hurt the person who loves me.
I'll talk about communication with my son and my husband. I start with my son. I actually have 2 sons, but I discussed my oldest because our relationship is longer, so I have more to reflect on. I'll talk about this with him. One thing that I learned from my son was that he used to get really upset sometimes because he would say how people do not value the opinions and the viewpoints of children, that people dismiss kids a lot, and that there's really no room for them to there's no room for them to be critical of adults or their behavior.
Right.
And so, and I was raised where I had a voice, so because I was raised by, in the late 70s, early 80s, that group of parents kind of did things a little differently. So I did have a voice in my household, but, not quite what my kids had, you know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? So in that sense, with my son and him being a black male, I found that, especially at a time where so much is happening in the world, and so many of the things that happen to black men in private and secretly happen to black men, that they don't necessarily come home and say the cops pulled me over or such and such and such. They just come home with it all, and we don't know. And so I think with all that stuff being public, that being open to our young men and what they have to say and really listening. And that was kind of difficult and a challenge for me, because as a parent, like, I want to guide and everything, so I would find myself speeching out my kid, and he would be like, okay, but that's not even what I want to talk about. That was dope, but that's not really what I want to talk about. And so I think with communication with kids, with young people, and particularly men of color, you know, any male of color, is helping them, stepping back a little bit and helping them to find their voice early. So you're not releasing a man into the world who has no idea what his own voice sounds like. So that was one of the things that I learned from my son. Like, he taught me that.
Yes.
And also how to take critique. That was difficult, because the black mother image is, I see all, I know all, don't question me. And it's like, and you really get off on that, because you're like, that's you know, strong black woman thing, like, that thing right there, sometimes it's a comfort, like a little blanket. It's like, you know, I'm in charge of this shit, you know what I mean? All this me, right here. All this is me. So, being able to humble yourself to your child is kind of deep and hard. And I'm still really sensitive about it. And they actually joke with me about it a lot. And I think that's a good kind of segue into communicating with my husband, because sometimes him and my son get into this little thing where they're like, you can't talk nothing, you can't say nothing about mom, because she start getting hyped and can't nobody say nothing. And so with my husband, I think the communication thing is always changing and morphing a little bit, because we were really young when we got married. So we didn't really know the basics. We didn't really know ourselves, so kind of getting to know ourselves. Then once we got to know ourselves, then it was like, okay, so now I have to introduce this person to me. And then you got to think back, well, Dad, did you ever know me? And then that's scary. Yeah. It's like, oh, do we belong together? And then it's like, oh, and then something will happen, and you be like, oh yeah, okay, we do. So that's really difficult. But the one thing I did learn with my husband that has helped me a lot is that when I first got married, I always wanted to present everything to him in the best possible light, so that I could get the result that I wanted. And I would never get that result. And I failed so many times that I had to go back and say, well, let me just not sugarcoat this anymore, because like, I'm not even getting what I want. He's mad, he doesn't like it, he feels manipulated, it doesn't feel good, nobody's happy. You know, so I learned how to tell him, and I said it in the piece, tell him who I am without being angry. Flat Asia is awesome Asia. I think we tell our mates too many things in our emotional state. We put our emotions into everything. You have to tell your mate who you are, like you talking about the weather, like it's fact. You don't, somebody will ask you what the weather's like, you like, it's like 60 degrees outside. Like, you know, it's just what it is. So I kind of learned how to say, whatever it is. And I'm sorry, I'm long-winded, but the last thing is this. It helps you to protect yourself from their triggers too. Because when you learn, they don't learn right away, because maybe they're not going through that same process in their mind at the same time. So if you are sure about what you're saying, even if you're wrong, if what you're saying is fact and it's true, even if you're in the wrong, if you say exactly who you are and what you are, sometimes your mate will respond in a toxic way, because they're not used to talking to nobody like that. They're used to the other way. So it helps to protect you from that, so then you know whatever they throw back at you, it's not really them. It's them and their stuff. And so it's easier to love them like that, because then you're not saying, oh no, you're not coming at me. You just didn't have to talk with yourself like I just did. You know what I mean? And I'll never forget this. The day we got married, the man who married us said, if you ever have issues, know that the person, if this person ever hurts you, and they will because this is marriage and it happens, he said, know that that is not your beloved. And I did not understand that until that moment where I was able to center myself and talk from a real place. And then he was a little funky, and I was just like, no, that's not you. That's not you. I'll give you a second. I'll hold your bag while you ride the ride.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, you have heard from the parental side, you have heard from the romantic relationship side, you have heard daughters speaking about fathers, and now we give you an opportunity to ask a question, to gain some insight, and if it's not about people's personal stories, we have our clinician with us who can give you some more insight into the behavioral health side of that. And so, your hand shot up.
Thank you, Stephanie. Wonderful presentation. I was just in awe. I want to speak to the piece about parenting. My son and I are in a war zone right now. He's 20 years old, and I feel so guilty in some of the things that I didn't expose him to, and he's called me a racist because I grew up in a different time where you had to be twice as good and that. And then you talk about a situation where 2 black men were arrested and held for 8 hours for sitting in a coffee shop that has a culture of people sitting in there. And how do we begin to talk to our young black boys in a way that is nurturing but not scary? I'm scared sometimes, and he yells at me sometimes. It's like, you're too scared, nobody's gonna shoot me in front of the Whole Foods on Lancaster Avenue on the main line. But that's my fear. And that's my fear, very real, when he's out with his white friends at night and doing things. I said, don't you know when trouble comes, when somebody pulls you over, all those boys are gonna swear up and down, it was you. Yep. And I live with that fear. It overwhelms me sometimes, that I'm awake at night waiting for the door and waiting on the phone, and I don't want my son to be afraid. But right now, I am so afraid. I am so afraid. Yes. And I don't know, these people who raise their boys, I am so afraid right now, everything that's going on. And I don't know how to contain my own fear. I don't want to project it onto him, but I am so afraid, and I don't even know how to have the conversations that don't lead to yelling matches with us, because all I'm trying to do is protect him.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I know we here, okay? Can I just say that you and I, we're here. My son, he comes home from school. First of all, I'm scared to death about my son coming home. He comes home on the 8th. And like I told you, 4 boys from his high school. One was just less than, 2 weeks ago. So I'm like, he's like, what do you want to do this? I'm like, what do you want to do this summer? You want to travel? Where you want to go? You want to get out of here? You know, I'm not that happy. I'm not really that excited. I'm excited to see him. I want to hold him, but I don't really want him in Philly. And a lot of the reason why is because, see, and here's the part where black parents cannot damn win. And I'm just going to, I'm going to be more positive after this, but I promise you, this is where we can't win. Because if we raise our children in an environment where we feel like they're going to get the best education, where we live in the safest neighborhood, you know what that means? No black people around, okay? So either our kids are completely detached from the experience of a great deal of our folks, not all, because a lot of black people don't never see the ghetto, so that's a misconception. But the idea is that they're either separated from an experience that's really important to understand as a black person in this country, or like me, I could afford to send my kid to private school. He got into private school, but we put him in public school because we're like, no, we live in this neighborhood for a reason. You can go to this school. You're gonna be around other black people, you know what I mean? But then the messed up part about that is, then my son has lost 4 friends in 1 year. That's not happening to your son, it's happening to mine though. You know what I mean? Your son's friends are white, my son's friends are black, his are dead. So this is the issue that we have as black parents. And I'm just gonna tell you, I don't have the answer for you, sister. I do know this. there's a conversation we need to have up in here, because what are Black parents going to do? We cannot win. Every choice that we make, we are backing our kids up into a corner. I will say this much too, that my generation of parents, we have done a terrible job in the terms of overprotecting our kids. We try to give them this bubble of an experience, and that's just not the world. And the good thing is they don't have a certain kind of chip on their shoulder, which is great because they have that sense of freedom that we really want them to have, that white freedom, where it's just they just walk the world and don't just living. But the fact is we were wrong. They're never going to have that. We tried to give them a gift that does not exist. They are Black. And so we have to take personal responsibility for the fact that that is not a gift that we can give them. We must give them a sense of freedom within who they are, not the one that we covet. There's a different freedom that we have as Black people. This is my belief, and so the doctor could probably tell you something more in line with what's real. This is just my opinion. We have to show them how to be free in the way that our ancestors were free when they decided, I'm gonna go in this ditch and I don't have no paper or no pen, but I'm gonna use this flower on the ground to learn how to read. That's freedom. I don't care if I die. I'm gonna get this word. If I learn 3 of these letters today and I die tomorrow, it's worth it. That's what we have to give them, that sense of freedom. Because that is a sense of freedom that is unique, that's ours. That's our gift. We don't have to covet a freedom that we're never going to get. And then on the backside of things, we have to also we need to also listen and tune in to what is really happening with these young people who are having the hard conversations we don't have. Where you have people of color and you have white people who are challenging themselves to have a much more complex conversation about race, about who we are, about gender, about all kinds of things that we're sitting on the sidelines scared because we are not in those conversations. We're not there. We are still living in glorifying a movement that don't even exist anymore, that couldn't exist even in this landscape. So my advice to you is just that we should stick together. Find other parents that are feeling how you're feeling, talk honestly with each other. Include your son in those conversations. Talk to him, not at him. You cannot protect him. The world is the world. But what you can do is you can make him in tune with your emotions and how you feel and what your fears are. So he's considering those things as he's walking the earth.
No, I don't have kids. I don't plan on having kids, but
Be quiet.
Okay, cool.
No. I'm just saying, if you don't have kids, it's really hard to.
Well, I just want to say that I think that it's very important for parents to arm their children, because I'm getting a sense that you are projecting your fear onto your son, and he's picking up on that, and he's ending up and he's rebelling, and you guys are having a communication breakdown. What I was going to suggest is that you as a parent have to realize that, you know what, I could get that call that my son is going to be dead. I could get that call that he was pulled over for something stupid and something bad has happened. You have to own that, because that's a real reality. And then what you have to do, you have to figure out how you can arm your son with information, so when he's in these, what do you do when a police officer pulls you over? How do you behave if you're in the mall and a police officer stops you? Do you have your ID on you? Who's your emergency contact? So you have to be very practical and arm your child with various different scenarios where he can protect himself in those areas. And you have to have the faith that he's going to take that knowledge and he's going to apply it if he is ever in those situations. Because just like you have a fear that he's out here hanging around these white kids and they're doing things recklessly in that freedom that we can't give our kids, that I didn't have it as a kid because I'm a Black person, you have to have a conversation with him and let him understand that he doesn't have those same freedoms and that he has to curtail his behavior in a certain way. And how is he going to respond if he's approached and all of his friends say, well, we didn't steal it, he did. Or they don't even answer the cop and the cop walks right over to him and say, you right there. You have to arm your son with what to do in that moment.
I was gonna say, Jamie wanted to.
Absolutely, what I was gonna say, train in a very calm way. Sure, you feel this way, and of course it is, baby, but if this happens, train. But the other point I wanted to make was, it's a new day. Because part of the reason we're here today is to help DBHIDS serve us better. And so what I'm hearing is, how to deal with the reality of being a black male out here in the world could potentially be a real way that DBH could help, empowering mothers and parents and how to train their children. And not just that, but what happens, because hearing it on the news and the radio is just as traumatizing. How do you deal with that? See, because as people of color, we don't go see a therapist. What's that all about? Guess what?
Better talk about it.
Guess what? People that are not people of color been benefiting from health care services for centuries. Why can't we? This idea that we ain't gonna go to no therapist, please. You think that CEO and his kids don't go to a therapist when they need some help? And when they get in trouble, they bring the therapist into the courtroom to get them out of jail.
You better tell it.
Accessing these services. Your child come home angry because they can see something happened at Starbucks. Call Pamela McClinton. Where can I get my son some help? Because where can I get some family counseling? Because if you got a brain in your head, you worry.
And and that also, the healthcare, mental health, especially like in communities of color, especially in Black communities, that's not something, that was something that I found out was beneficial for me later on in life. And just going and talking about, I have these fears around my child and working through them, for you, it makes it better for your kid. I'm not the moderator, so I can't pick out kids, but we'll take you back all the way over there.
We have to be mindful of time. If you can ask a question, we'll try to have one person respond, just so we can have more questions come in. And the lady in the mustard in the back was the next hand I saw shoot up.
Hi. I just want to give their sister some support that you are not alone. And my son has a variety of friends from Black, white, Asian. And I had to do exactly what she said. I had to do some role playing with him. I had to say, what if you're stopped? And then I had to be open to when he told me when he was and not flip out. So when he told me when that happened, we went through it, but he had to make sure that I wasn't going to be a crying, uncontrollable mess. And then what I had to do is give it to my God. Say, God did not give me the power of fear, but of love and of power. And I'm going to equip this child. Because him and I go at it now about different things about how to prepare yourself. He sees he has all the time in the world. And I see that there is a short view. So I have to, and then I have to sit to myself and remember when I was a teenager. I thought I knew it all. I thought I had all the answers. And I did not grow up with a father. So there's certain things that my son, I say, I can't help him to be that man that I want him to be. So then let me find other ways to give it to him. So I introduce him to different folks. I'll go, this person over here want to talk to you. This person over here don't talk to you. Then one day he's like, Mom, you're telling my business all over the place. And finally I had to say to him, son, it's not that I'm telling your business. Please, first I had to apologize. I'm sorry. You're right. But I'm concerned about you. And I can't tell you how to be this Black man that I want you to be, that I know that you can be. So I try to put Black men in your lives.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you for that. What we'd like to do, again, so we can keep the flow moving, I want to take the gentleman in black and the sister over here in red, And for everyone else, if you wouldn't mind, even though we don't have a mic there, but coming to the center aisle, and that way we can circulate through the questions. And if you could try to keep your questions brief so that we can get you detailed answers. Yes, that would help. So, gentleman in the black.
Oh yeah. First and foremost, I want to say the worrying part that's going to always happen. You're a mother, and I'm a son of a mother. Like, I got 4 brothers. I was raised by a single mother. I told my father. Been in jail. I was that kid, that black kid. I got white friends. I got black friends that's dead. I got white friends. I've been to college. I got singled out. I was that black kid that was singled out of all the white kids of the crime. Ended up losing my scholarship. And it's still, it makes us stronger. I don't want you to sit up here and think that just because of what's seen on TV and everything that's going on in the world, portrayal of negativity, I want you to really sit up there and think that and know that we are okay. Like, it's making us stronger each and every day. It's giving us different ways to go about things, different ways to think, and this motivates us. It motivates me every day to do better as a black man. Despite all the things I came from, it motivates me to just go better and do better and strive in bigger things in life. So I want you to realize that even though all that negativity is going on with the TV and things like this, also motivating us to do better. I see so many more black men of my kind at a higher rate in life and being successful and excelling. And so even though they're bringing it out to the light, they're killing us in public, but it's still making us stronger. I just want you to understand that coming from a black man.
Thank you for that.
I just want to say I am just so blessed to be in this presence right here, right now. And to know that I'm sitting not too far from where would I be if I didn't know you?
Yes, yes.
I'm just saying, like, I'm so overwhelmed. And not to mention that painting right there, I had the opportunity to paint that. You see that right there? I am floored to be in this forum right now. So let me breathe. I was determined that once I got through my father's hurt, got through men hurting me, healed, I'm good. My brother, okay? My brother, I said, I'm never taking another man is never gonna take me there again. God, I got this. And recently, my brother came from Louisiana, disappeared for 10 days. The car was on the street. We had to call the cops, MIA. I was done. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't do nothing. How about this guy comes in the house 10 days later as if nothing happened? We couldn't ask any questions. I didn't know what to do. And so I stand here to you looking at mostly women, and I'm like, you know what, I love y'all, but I want to hear this one from a man, please. What in the world? I didn't know what to say. And believe it or not, it's been about almost a month. The family, my mom, everybody's going on as normal, as if nothing happened. Yeah. And I said, Lord, I don't want to get into religion. Everybody has a different spirituality, but I'm like, this is not cool. Like, I want to address it and say, excuse me, I love you. You are my blood. Now, I'm okay with men. I dealt with that. I'm okay with my father's thing. But you're my brother.
Right.
And so after missing on the, the police people, would they take your picture?
Yeah.
Missing in the Philadelphia Police Department, all of that. Going to hospitals looking to see if he's in there, trying to find his, what's that dog? What you call it, Ankh? The Ankh thing?
Yeah.
That's a tattoo that he has. So they asked him, does he have any tattoos? So we think, oh my God, he's in the morgue. Going through all that. And then he comes home like nothing.
Right, right.
So as a woman, I'm talking, we don't let men, I see y'all up in here. How in the world what can I say?
That communication. I want to jump to that because the first piece that I did was about my brother.
Yes.
I wrote that piece very specifically because, as our families tend to do, once someone has passed on, once they have met a tragic end, then we want to sink them, right? We don't want to deal with what everybody was struggling with when they were still here on this earthly plane breathing. And I had to write that piece because nobody in my family wanted to deal with my brother's addiction. When I asked that question, where were you going that late at night, that night in December with our presents in the back seat? Why were you on the road?
Right.
Right? With the presents in the car. You weren't on your way to family dinner for Christmas, right? So clearly there was some transaction that was happening that put you in that space for us to do. And nobody to this day in my family wanted to talk about it. I shared that piece for the first time the night before the Million Man March.
Oh, wow.
And it was a gathering that was for us to talk about our relationships with our men, right? And trying to be respectful of the idea that Minister Farrakhan asked sisters not to come, right? That was supposed to be a day for the men, particular. But I had to express this challenge I was in of loving my brother and being pissed at him at the same time for those same kinds of reasons. I had questions I would never get answered because of the fact that he was now gone, and doubly bad because nobody in my family wanted to talk about it. And so the seeds that people have shared with us about open communication becomes really important in the scenario that you've given us. The idea that you've got to feel empowered to say to your brother, listen, we can't keep doing this dance and act like what you did wasn't jacked up, dude. And feel and be able to do that in love. You know?
But see, from a woman's point of view, that's what we say. But I want to know from a man how, I know he's embarrassed, I know he's ashamed, I feel all that. But to me, it's a man that will tell me, from a man's perspective, what I don't think.
If I could just jump in really quick.
I don't think we can,
Go
I
ahead.
don't think we can touch that part.
I just have a question.
Well, we can't, we don't want to move up her point.
I can address that though.
Okay.
I think what's really important though, in these kind of spaces, right, with engaging males of color, because what can happen often is like, I think in these conversations, what gets eclipsed, right, because it's like, we have these women, y'all who are honoring males of color, which is really beautiful, which is really great. But in doing that, we center men in a way that often eclipse the experiences of women of color and femmes of color. Because as a person, right, I'm male bodied, I don't identify as a man, right? I'm male bodied, but I understand all the women and femmes who are of color in my space say like, men are trash, right? And I wonder, right, but there's a reason behind that. That's the whole other conversation. But I wonder, like, this is a great event, but I'm looking for an event where men of color want to honor women, right? And I've never seen that before. And I think it's because, no, I know it's because there's empirical data for this. It's like, there's a way to hold space for this, right? All of this, how we can honor and love the men of color in our lives without diminishing and erasing the ways, like loving men of color often is violence and is labor that black women, that women of color do, that men don't give to them, right? And so he can do that, right? He can do that work what he does and show up and disappear without consequence because patriarchy allows him to do that without consequence.
Right, but the blessing of this, the blessing of this forum right here is when I walk out of here, I want to know how to communicate effectively from this forum, and I feel it. I know this is ordained that I'm here. That when I pick that call up and call in Louisiana, I can do it with strength and empowerment and knowledge to say either, sweetie, you all right? Or listen, we might need to talk about, you know, what happens to us. And that was what my question was for. Only from a brother's perspective, from a brother to a sister. That's what I'm looking for.
But can I answer that to you? I feel like what you said though, you're doing the work. You've done it. And so him responding is his work. Because your question is like, what more can I do? I feel like you've done above and beyond what you could do. Right? Because
my reaction is to say some bad things.
Right, and I feel like that's fine too, but it's just like, what responsibility then does a man or a male of color on to say, I need to engage in a type of labor that women of color historically have done that I haven't even started yet.
Well, see, I like the fact that you're touching on that.
And that gets hard because it feels like, and I know because I have brothers and people like that, like, oh, if I acknowledge it and name that, then you're eclipsing my pain. It's like, no, those things can coexist at the same time. It's like, yeah, I need to be seen and validated for all the things I'm experiencing as a male of color going into this world, right? Who has to be killed, but also in doing that, who comes to aid? Who comes to the aid all the time? You come to the aid, you come to the aid, you come to the aid, you come to the aid. Is that reciprocated? Where do you see that reciprocated? So it's not just diminishing, it's holding both in tandem, and I don't think that happens. And that's why you feel the way that you do, because guess what? You're doing all this labor for your brother and loving him. Where is he showing up and taking responsibility and saying, my sister is showing up so powerfully for me, caring about me, loving me in all those kind of ways. So you're looking for answers, but you've done the work. But men historically and collectively as a community, males of color haven't done that work that you've been trained by your grandmother, your great-grandmother, and your aunts and uncles to do that work. And so there's a responsibility for us.
Let's all must be careful.
But
languages that we don't persevere and stigmatize as a group. This conversation is about the ability of women to love men of color.
Absolutely.
And women
And women of color are here, they're doing that, and they're worried more than male of
women
color.
who are able to love through the barrier.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad that you said that about the barrier, and just to talk a little bit about what you said, I think that we are conditioned to like keep loving and keep giving chances and keep giving chances. And it may sound very hard and fast, but sometimes you just have to let people know where the limits of your love end. Like, I can love you, but I can't tolerate this behavior. Now, if you don't feel like you have to, you're obligated or responsible to, as a person who says that you love me as my brother, and I have a brother, he's 14 years younger than me, so I understand a little bit about what you're saying, because I'm like, well, how did you break your leg around Christmas? You know what I mean? I know how you broke your leg. You probably got a little too intoxicated and you probably slipped down the steps. But he doesn't feel as though he owes me that because of patriarchy. And I have to let him understand that, like, okay, well, until we can have a real conversation, this is my boundary with you. I have to let him miss the relationship with me, and eventually he does come around like, you know what, you did call me out on that. So I have to stand my ground and still love him from afar, but I have to let him know that my love for him is boundless, but I'm not gonna tolerate certain types of behavior because it's damaging to me and it's damaging to him, and I don't wanna sit around and watch him do that.
And I hope you feel that. So you said you feel the energy, and so part of the answer that I hope you receive from both of them is that your boundaries are incredibly important in that moment, and letting him know that you need him to do the work. And when he's ready to come to you and participate in that work with you and heal the bond or whatever else is necessary for you to feel whole, then you have a different kind of conversation. You have a different kind of relationship.
I think also too, what the young man was trying to get you to understand also is that, so when we talk about race, right, we talk about people in their individual racism, right, and our individual experiences with that. That's, powerful. But then there's a systemic issue that hovers over all of it. And so as we are going through this journey, we're starting to see, if we don't address the systemic issue, we're just going to always be patching up these little issues. We're going to be marching till they have, a seminar. Or we're going to just making sure that particular cop gets arrested. Which is all good and fine work. It's excellent. It's work at the, is it micro? At the micro level. And so, but what we got to look at is what's bigger. And so what he's trying to say to you is to get a better understanding of your brother, right? You have to not just understand you all and how you connect individually, but what is the systemic issue that's hovering above your family that means that they don't address him? The idea that they don't address him because he doesn't have to be addressed. And not just your brother, but men in general. And black men, and I just want to address you, brother, because I felt you didn't feel understood. As black men, when we have these conversations, oftentimes they feel attacked. Because what happens is that they are black men, and they are under attack, and that is real. and men of color, period, because the truth of the matter is that this is happening to brown people also, so we cannot. So the idea here is that, yeah, they feel attacked, they're like, wait a minute. How can I victimize and be the victim at the same time? Because you belong to a group that has a systemic advantage over the women you love. And so as a man, it's great if you would help do the work to address the bigger issue as a way of loving us back. In addition to addressing how well we love you individually. Because my husband can tell me all day long, baby, I love you, you're awesome, you made the hell out of that sandwich. But when it's time to speak for women as a whole, when it's time to speak for the ways in which he's privileged, which is a very difficult thing to accept for black men, is that you are privileged in the way that you are a man. And so that's something that we would appreciate in return, so much more, or in addition to that individual expression of love.
Yes. Thank you. We got time for one more. Come over to ask your questions.
Oh, do you want me to go I was going to ask this question in the beginning, but apparently Spirit wanted me to wait because it was answered by other people's questions and responses. But I do feel like I have two things to say. One, going to what you were saying about your brother, I recently just lost my brother in August, and he's just, the most amount of time I had ever spent with him was 3 months after he turned 14 and was in juvie, and then forever until that. And just getting popped for buying dime bags or being in the wrong neighborhood, stupid shit like that. But then eventually he won a police brutality lawsuit, got 13 grand, and then received it 4 days after getting out of jail, and then just had a party and passed out and died in a hotel. And so there was a lot to do with that in terms of people constantly trying to reach out with him. He was the only male in a family of women. And so I thank you so much for what you were saying, because what you were saying made me reflect on the fact that my brother did come home every time expecting all these women to just take care of him, and and then also the violence aspect. We always talk about violence in terms of romantic relationships, but a lot of it with my brother was he was severely violent in a lot of ways. We're all very violent in our family. My mom was black belt in beating our asses, so that's how we communicated with each other. So it was more about a fear of approachment in talking about things because you knew it was going to blow up. So that's why a lot of us sort of feel this weird guilt, but we also know that it would have turned into him trying to stab us or something like that. So his death was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. So now our family is I'm excommunicated, that's all gone. But there was a lot that had to be, that brought him to the place that he was in terms of the fear that was instilled in him by our mother about what's going on out there. And so speaking to what you were saying, hearing you talk about your son and the conversations that you were having with your son, it just brought waves of anger back into my life, because I experienced my mom speaking to my brother this way, and I could see how that fear just fueled his anger and just made him start making those bad choices. We also grew up in very privileged areas where we had lots of white friends more so than black friends, and it was always this thing where those white people are gonna betray you always, and so you need to watch your back always. But it was almost like she didn't trust our ability to make friends or to trust other people, and that really pushed us away from her, and it felt like a poison. Like, and so that's what I was feeling like I was being filled with, listening to you again, because I was just hearing my mom all over again. It's like, that's poison. And the thing that saved me really was my grandmother, who is an off-the-boat Sicilian, wise guy all day, and she always told me, people will betray you no matter what color.
Right, yeah.
It's all about content of character.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to build enough character within yourself in order to trust other people. And so my mom's constant, and still to this day, she will get on the phone and tell me, I don't know what you're doing with those white people, but you need to get the fuck out of there. And people constantly tell me, oh my God, I can't believe all the things that you've done with your life. But if I listened to my mom and all the fears she had installed in me, I would be dead like my brother. Absolutely, 100%. In and out of jail, no problem. And so I just want to put that out there, that sometimes that fear, it's good to let people know, but it can be a poison. And it can stop people from really going to where they need to go.
I want to thank you for sharing that, and I want to, because we have to wrap up, I hope that everyone in the room understands how necessary it is for the village to convene, for us to have safe spaces to discuss this, and how much, so much of what our storytellers have shared and what you all have shared as an audience is so critical that this conversation has been facilitated by our Department of Behavioral Health. Because at the end of the day, what we need to be clear about is that the creation of safe space to discuss what we are going through and having the resources available for us to continue the conversation beyond this room today is critically important to our surviving and thriving. So please, if anyone has felt something today that needs to continue to be worked out, talked out, do not leave here today without getting a flyer or going to visit a website or pulling someone over to the side and having a further conversation that can continue the healing that has been stimulated by the honest sharing that has happened in this room today. That's what this is all about. And Jamie, please also help us to understand how First Person Arts engages in this work on an ongoing basis.
Well, First Person Arts is a Philly-based not-for-profit, and we develop true personal stories for the stage, for the stage, and for broadcast. So we're on YouTube, we're online, and we are privileged to be a part of this. I mean, stand up, Roland. This is your deputy commissioner. Stand up. Okay, so did you notice something? They're males of color.
Yeah.
Okay? They care about what's happening. So this is what I'm going to ask you to do. You've been given a survey. Okay? It is imperative. That's your voice. If there is a topic that you feel like you would like to reconvene about around women who love males of color, write it on the bottom of that survey. There are tables over here if you need some help. Okay? Stop at a table. And if somebody in this room said something that resonated with you, like Stephanie said, pull them aside. Because when we're in between convenings, we need to be having solid relationships with people that can help us around these issues. So with that, and with a heart full of love, we all say thank you, thank you, thank you.